What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Speak Up series. Today we have an amazing guest. You were able to catch her on Hulu and Little Fires Everywhere. Please give it up for Lexi Underwood.
Woo! Lexi.
Hi.
So, Lexi, we want to start. We've been starting every single interview by, obviously there's a lot going on in the world right now, and there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of trauma, and this can a lot of the time affect people's mental health. So we're, really just checking in with each of our guests and want to ask, how you feeling? Where's your headspace in this time?
I'm doing good. I'm just trying to stay as sane as I can, which has been incredibly hard. Especially last week. Last week was an incredibly challenging week. It's been different. It's been a little bit weird because I think there's a lot of pressure on teens, especially because, we're going through life trying to figure out like all these things like high school, just all that type of stuff that, normal teenagers go through. And then on top of that, we're currently living in the middle of a global pandemic. And then we're seeing people that look like us, be beaten and killed in streets by people that are supposed to protect and serve us, which is just incredibly nerve-wracking. So I've been just trying my best, trying to take, days, and there are times where I'm creative. I find beauty in, being creative and all that type of stuff. But then there are also times where I just simply don't feel like doing anything, because those days are also needed just as much as, the days where you're trying to go and do stuff and get things done. So.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier when I don't know how it's going to be cut and everything, but our conversation with Sir Brett Gray is, kind of expanding upon taking a breath in the midst of all of this, and allowing yourself to take a breath, because we have so many people that are joining the movement and so many people fighting on our behalf. So it's okay to take breaths every now and then,
So you were in Little Fires Everywhere with where Kerry Washington.
Not only was she in it, but she killed it.
Killed it.
Bodied it. In Little Fires Everywhere, one of the big themes of it is the topic of racism. And in this community, it's like everybody, at least from how I saw it, it's like everybody sort of wanted to skirt around that idea that, oh, I'm not racist, I care. But that came with a lot of like microaggressions. And I think what I would like to ask you is like, how important was that message when you first read the script? Like, how did that come across to you? And then was there anything about being a Black woman on that set that even spoke further to the experience of being Black in America?
Well, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was the first time that I opened up the script for the pilot episode, and it basically described that the first time that you see into me and Pearl's world is an encounter with the police. And in that moment, I actually like started to tear up a bit, because just the fact that this show is supposed to be set in 1997, this is the first time that you see into this family's world, and it's something that is so relevant right now. It just meant a lot for that to be portrayed on screen. And so when it came to, all these microaggressions and everything, there were a lot of conversations on set, because in the book, me and Pearl don't have a race assigned to them. You don't know if they're white or they're Asian. You have no clue. And originally, readers immediately thought that they were either white or Asian. And so when they made that decision to cast, two Black females to play, this interesting and complex dynamic of, a single mother and daughter that's honestly just trying to make their way through America, there's just so many layers and complexities added to it, because you have this incredibly complex storyline, but then adding it and making it, two Black women just adds so much more weight to it. And so I think that, stories like that are important, and I'm incredibly grateful of the fact that I did get to portray Pearl, because I think that something was just so beautiful was that even in the midst of, all these things that these characters are going through, at the end of the day, you just see a 15-year-old Black girl that's going through life no matter what time period it is. I mean, I feel like I can relate to her. I've heard a lot of my friends say that they can relate to Pearl and just the things that she's going through. And I think that it's not even just Pearl. I think it's all the teen characters. They're in the midst of, all this madness. and also kind of just trying to figure out what it's like to be a teenager and going through life, you know, trying just to figure out their place in the world without the guidance from their moms. And so that's what I think is so beautiful about the story and Pearl, that, you know, she gets caught up in the midst of all this stuff and she makes dumb decisions sometimes. But at the end of the day, you just see a 15-year-old Black girl that's trying her best to make it without the influence of her mom in her ear.
Was there anything in that was there anything in your real life that you sort of used to not relate, because it's like you're a Black girl, you don't have to try that hard to be a Black girl, but was there any experiences that you've had in your life that you sort of used to get you through some of the situations in the scripts or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was just the microaggressions that she faces when it comes to that relationship between her and Lexi Richardson. And I think that that's just such an interesting dynamic, because growing up, you know, in DC, I went to most of the schools that I went to, the majority of kids that went there were either white or Hispanic. And so, you know, that meant that a lot of times I would get comments like, oh, you're so pretty, what are you mixed with? Or, oh, can I touch your hair? Oh, just like the slick comments where, you know, I would take it because in that moment, those were the only people that I was surrounded by. But then growing up, as I got older, I learned that, you know, those things weren't necessarily acceptable. Those comments were incredibly disrespectful. So I definitely, you know, drew my experience to being in public school when I was younger to just that dynamic between Lexi and Pearl.
So concerning the events of the past like a few weeks, something that you have been doing quite a lot is reminding people of Breonna Taylor's place in this. And many people feel like Breonna Taylor and other Black female victims of police brutality are being forgotten in this conversation. Just kind of speak on that. Like, how does that make you feel? And, you know, what's your drive to make sure that these names are not forgotten?
I mean, it's absolutely devastating, the amount of erasure that Black women get, even in the midst of tragedy and death. As early as 5 years old, Black girls are always kind of seen as more adult-like and less innocent and feminine than their white female peers. And so I think that it ties into this systematic oppression and racism within the Black girl community that we've always had to deal with, you know, from the time that, like I said, 5 years old, they're always telling us how we should dress, how we should act, you know, don't be too loud, don't be too angry, you know, seen as, you know, an angry Black woman and all those type of things. And I think that, you know, we don't necessarily give Black girls the space or opportunity to be children, to be seen as innocent, and we're constantly setting these standards for them. And I think that, I mean, just a quote that has always stood out to me ever since I heard it was Malcolm X said it best: the most disrespected person in America is a Black woman, the most unprotected person in America is a Black woman, and the most neglected person in America is a Black woman. And ironically, Malcolm X said that on May 5th, 1962, I believe, at the funeral service of Ronald Stokes in LA, who was a Black man that was actually killed by LAPD.
Wow.
So to me, Malcolm's comment kind of echoes sentiments made by various people, including like Zora Neale Hurston and her, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And, you know, in the novel, there comes like a key moment where Jamie Crawford, I don't know if you've ever read it before, but Jamie Crawford watches a group of men play with a mule. And there's this thing that her nanny says, that the Black woman is the mule of the world. And to me, it just means that, you know, the mule finds itself tortured and burdened with this hardship for no other reason other than the sake of burdening it. And so the mule, like the Black women, I feel as though most times within our own community, we're the ones that are carrying all the weight. And even being only 16 years old, I've felt, you know, the weight of, you know, these burdens on me ever since I was younger, like a lot of my friends, my counterparts, my female Black counterparts. And so I think that, you know, with no voice or agency of its own, the mule kind of reminds her that, you know, the Black woman in America is the one who must suffer and endure the most. And she suffers not only because of, you know, it's not any choice of her own, but precisely because she has no choice in the matter. And it even just kind of like, to me, that statement just stands out like in the most. And I mean, I just recently found this out, maybe like a couple of weeks ago, that the age of consent in Nigeria for only Black girls, it's only applies to Black girls, is only 11 years old.
Wow.
So in Nigeria, all these, Black girls are basically getting robbed of this childhood and this innocence, and nobody's really speaking up about those matters. And I think yet again, it goes back to Breonna Taylor, goes back to Sandra Bland, it goes back to Regis Paquette, who was literally a 21-year-old female who was killed by the police department in Canada 2 weeks ago. Nobody has talked about it at all. They came into her apartment. It was the wrong apartment. They woke her up out of her sleep and literally threw her off of the balcony and then said that it was suicide. And so it's just those type of things that we don't necessarily hear about in the media, that I always think that, when you're protesting, when you're posting, just make sure that you don't forget about all the Black girls and the Black women that have been killed, not even just due to police brutality, but racism in general. And it's not even just that, it's also just like when we go missing. There was this whole thing back in 2017 where it was, all these Black kids went missing, especially Black girls in DC. And my friend that I grew up with was actually affected and she was taken. And so it's just the fact that, also Black girls go missing at a higher rate than anybody else really in America. And it's just those type of things. So making sure that when you are speaking out about these racial injustices happening, making sure that you don't necessarily forget all the Black girls and Black women that have, also been fighting this oppression, because there's a lot of stuff within, our own community with Black girls. It's not even just that, it's also like colorism, just the things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So
we were talking about this, me, Ethan, and Reed, but Black women are constantly, consistently the ones that are organizing these movements and that are pushing them forward, and that are, making sure or striving the most to make sure that, especially when it comes to Black men being killed, they're the ones that are fighting at the front lines to be sure that that our voices are heard and that our names are never forgotten. So as the Black community and as Black men, we need to make sure that that's reciprocated and we're giving the same energy to our queens.
Yeah, most definitely. It's like, it's so unfortunate because the way that you explain it, it sounds as though Black women have to carry everybody's burdens. And it's like that thing of like, you do so much for somebody and they don't even ask you how you're feeling, like how are you, and it's unfortunate because so we wouldn't be here without Black women.
Exactly.
A lot of and there's a lot of things that have been created in this world and pushed in this world because of Black women, and we definitely need to, like you said, we need to step up as Black men, and then after that as a whole society, because that narrative completely has to change.
I saw a tweet the other day that it just really hurt, but it's a true sentiment where it's just like, okay, Black women, we're here, we're pulling up, we're fighting for George Floyd, we're fighting for Ahmaud Arbery, we're fighting for all these injustices happening. But then when it happens to us, we don't necessarily see the exact amount of rage. And so that becomes the question where, okay, well, let's say if George Floyd didn't pass, if Ahmaud Arbery didn't pass, and it was just Breonna Taylor, would there be
a movement?
Who would have showed up for us? Who would have been protesting? Who would have been posting? Would there have been a Blackout Tuesday if it was just Breonna Taylor? So, yeah.
What do you think it is about the Black woman that makes everybody? Do you think maybe it's like the reverse idea of like, oh, she's strong, so she doesn't need me to tell her? I mean, that's messed up, but it's like, I'm just so curious as to like why that's the case, because that's the truth. There would be no movement if it was just Breonna Taylor.
That's a great question, and I don't necessarily know the answer. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer,
right?
Because it goes back to honestly just slavery times where Black women have always kind of held these burdens on their back. We're always constantly kind of seen as the protectors and the providers, the ones that are supposed to be strong in the midst of these tragedies. But in reality, there has to be a moment where sometimes you just have to let us breathe. And sometimes we even see it within our own industry when it comes to portraying Black women on screen, making sure that we're also portraying them properly as human. and not just, you know, sidekicks and not just, you know, the best friend and all those type of things, because just like everybody else, we feel, we grieve, you know, we're hurt, but we also, you know, can find that strength in the midst of all this tragedy. We can find that strength and we can rise up, and, you know, we can still manage to be there for other people. And so in my eyes, Black women are like superheroes because
For sure.
Yeah, no. Okay. So how important is it for Black girls, for Black women to know that, to understand that they are superheroes, even in times where they feel disrespected, where they feel, you know, where they feel like where people, in times where people look at them when they're young, as older as they are, you know, just throughout those times, essentially, how do they stay reminded that they're superheroes, they're wonderful, they're magnificent, they're queens?
Honestly, I think it has to do with a lot of what we put out in the media. And I think it also starts within our own industry, within our own business. Make sure that we're being conscious about the stories that we're telling, and making sure that we are pushing those narratives forward. And even just with roles like Pearl and like Meg and A Wrinkle in Time, and just like all those, you know, just those strong females that, you know, are so complex, and you see like a range of emotion. You see them, you know, being scared, but then you also see them coming out on top in the midst of, you know, all this chaos and tragedy. So I think it's important that, you know, I know that you all write and I write as well. And so just keeping that in the back of our heads, that, you know, when we're writing, when we're creating, making sure that we don't forget to properly portray Black girls and Black women, and not just have them broken, not just have them as a sidekick, not just have them as a background character, because, you know, we are complex and there's just so many layers to us that aren't necessarily unpacked when it comes to the media, television, and film.
Well, beautiful words. Thank you.
Wise
Thank you so much, Lexi, for coming on. See y'all next time, I guess.
Yeah, peace out.